Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kiana and today I have some sewing tips and tricks for you guys. If you have not seen the video I did last month, I actually went through like all my favorite sewing supplies, like my wrist pin cushion, my pattern weights, my retractable measuring tape, and those are kind of like tips and tricks in itself, so I will definitely link that down below if you want to check that out because I have a lot more tips and tricks in that. But today I wanted to focus on not really products. I think I have a couple products in here, but like mostly just like methods of sewing and like tips and tricks. So let's just get into it. Starting with number one, you can wind your bobbins by hand. Sometimes if you're sewing up a hole or doing an alteration, you need to have a bobbin with matching thread. So instead of putting that bobbin on your machine and winding it up either all the way or just a little bit, you can literally just hand wind it in like 10 seconds and then pop it in your machine and it's ready to go. So much easier, less of a hassle. Number two is replacing your needles and changing your needles. So did you know, allegedly, you were supposed to change your needle every like 2 or 3 bobbin uses? Like every time you go through 2 or 3 bobbins, you're supposed to replace the needle in your machine. I've heard it that way, and then I've also heard people say like you're supposed to change it after each project, but that can really vary because some projects are huge, some are small, so a lot of people go months, years without replacing their needle, assuming it doesn't break, but you are supposed to replace your needle. Just like scissors or anything sharp, needles get dull and they won't be able to pierce through the fabric easy, and it can cause things like your fabric getting jammed in your machine. It can cause holes, runs, all those bad things in your fabric. So I kind of like listen, and you can hear a sound when the needle goes through. It'll like I don't know how to describe it. Also, going along with that, there are many different types of needles. You need to be switching up your needles. So I work with a lot of satin, a lot of thin material, chiffon. I usually have like a thinner needle in my machine or smaller needle. Whatever fabric you're using, Google what type of needle or what size needle you're supposed to be using with that fabric because it does make a huge difference. You don't want to use a big needle on something like satin. It'll pull the fabric. There are rules to these things, or like guidelines at least. Nothing is a rule. But like there are things that you should do and needles that you should use for whatever type of fabric you're working with. You can get something called a twin needle, which I explained in one of my other videos, and it will let you hem knits in a way that looks like a cover stitch. So just definitely check out all the needles they have because you might be surprised what you can accomplish with your home sewing machine. My third tip, this is a good one. When you're pinning your fabric, how should you pin your fabric? There are groups of people that think you should pin your needles perpendicular to the seam. There are groups of people that think you should pin your needles parallel to the seam. So who is right? There is a war on this topic. I pin both ways. I do vertically and horizontally because have an open mind, guys. Generally, if I'm sewing something like really tricky, like a really tight curve, I will pin the needles parallel to the edge, and I will pin them like exactly on the line that I'm going to be sewing, just so there's no room for the fabric to like pivot or move or shift at all. But other times I'll pin the opposite way, so it really just depends on what I'm doing. I will mix it up. If I'm pinning parallel though, something I always do, I will take my fabric, I'll take the seam that I'm going to be sewing, hold it on the top, like let the rest of the fabric dangle under and hold the seam on the top. I will take my right hand, because I'm right-handed, and pin the fabric from right to left, and I will basically start sewing from left to right, because then when you bring it over to the machine, it'll be really easy to pull out those pins. I need to get my corner turner. Hold on. Okay, I got it. What is this you're holding? What is that, Kiana? This, my trusty device, is like a corner turner. I don't know what you call this actually. If you've ever sewn something that has a 90-degree corner or whatever degree corner, a corner, you can stick this in and push out the corner. I used to use all types of things to push out the corners. I'd use like pens and pencils, and then sometimes it'd rip a hole through the corner. I wish I had this my whole life. It just makes turning out corners super easy, so I will link this below as well. Okay, number 5. I don't know about you guys, but it honestly took me an absurd amount of time to realize that a thimble is not only used just for like not pricking yourself with a pin. I don't know why I thought that that was its only use, because it's definitely not. I'm always wearing a thimble when I'm hand sewing, basically, because really the primary purpose of a thimble is to help push your needle through the fabric so that your needle doesn't end up pushing into your skin, which would hurt. So I'm usually wearing this every time I'm hand sewing, especially if it's thicker fabric that I need to push the needle through. And then also just when I'm pinning my garments either on a dress form or I'm pinning the garments together. I a lot of the times have a thimble on just because I am pinning so much, and pushing on the pins with your finger can end up really hurting over a period of time. So I'm always wearing a thimble. I will link this one below. Another tip. This is the only tip out of this entire video. Like, you don't have to use any of these tips. You don't, except for this one. I don't even know why I'm including this in this video, because this is just like sewing law. Like, you have to do this. You have to press your seams after each seam you sew. I mean, like, it's fine if you're sewing a bunch of vertical lines and then you want to go and press them all at once, fine. But if you sew a vertical line and then you sew a line that's intersecting that line and you don't press until after those, you know you should be doing that. So like, I know you've been told it before. If you haven't been told this, I'm telling you right now, and I'm sure you will press all of your seams in the future. You also need to clip your threads after every seam. This one like needs to be done at the time it happens. Every time you sew a seam, clip the threads. Like, you really think these things don't matter, but they really do. People can tell. Like, I feel strongly. Those are the only things I'm gonna say you have to do. Like, for sure. Everything else, whatevs, do what you want. Next off, I want to show you how I make my sewing knots. Everyone does this different. There are ways that you're supposed to do it, ways that you're not supposed to do it, blah, 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 blah. This is how I make knots, like when I'm hand sewing. Just works for me, whatever. Whatever works for you, whatevs. Before I do this, I already have waxed my thread, get it prepped for hand sewing, thread it through the needle. And then I take the needle, I'm right-handed, so I'll hold it between my pointer finger and thumb in the right hand. I'll pull the thread basically almost all the way until there's just a little bit hanging out between my thumb and forefinger. Then I'll grab the other end of the thread between my thumb and forefinger. Then I'll have this nice little loop. Then I'll wrap the thread around the needle a few times until I have a big enough knot to secure to my fabric. I will grab that little knot with my thumb and forefinger, and then I'll pull the needle, and then I'll have a little knot secured. I mean, I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain, but you saw what I just did. So that is how I make knots, and that's also kind of how I tie it off at the end. I'll just wrap it around and then pull it through. Next, oh, this is a big one. Make a prototype. Again, I feel like I shouldn't have to say that. Like, if you're buying a standardized pattern, it's like a standardized pattern. It's standardized measurements. 99.9% of us are not standardized measurements. So like, right off the bat, like, I'm super tall and then I'm pretty skinny. So size small, what I normally wear is, if I'm making something from a pattern, is gonna be too short. That's just like very basic. Like, there are all these different measurements for your body that will change from the standardized patterns. So if you're buying a pattern and you're not making a prototype, you're not setting yourself up for success. You wanna make a prototype, make adjustments to your patterns as needed, and then make the final product. And also, this definitely goes for if you are draping and patterning yourself. You wanna keep prototyping and adjusting the patterns until you've got it right, until you feel like this is the perfect fit. Now I can make it out of my real fashion fabric. Sometimes this is not realistic. Like, you don't wanna make 5 prototypes, but like I'm telling you, the more prototypes that you make, the better your final garment will turn out. It's like, if you don't prototype, it's kind of like luck, you know what I'm saying? So sometimes it'll turn out good, but sometimes it'll turn out horrible. But if you prototype, it'll always turn out good. So just keep that in mind. Also, something I do is, if I'm making my own patterns, I will sometimes not add seam allowance. Like, what? Why would you not add seam allowance? Well, I will cut out my pattern pieces without seam allowance and then either trace the pattern piece with a pencil or thread trace that pattern piece, and then I will cut out like a 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch seam allowance with just my scissors, and then I will sew based upon the line I marked, like the stitch line, and not sew based upon my seam allowance, because this is actually just a little bit more precise. This is definitely going the extra mile. You don't have to do that by any means. It's just something I like to do if I'm feeling extra fancy. They do it in couture, and I just am trying to be as fancy as possible, let's be real. And then one last tip, I feel like I don't hear this ever on YouTube, but I definitely preach it in a bunch of my other videos, so you probably have heard it, is to always sew in the same direction. So for example, if I'm sewing something with a bunch of vertical panels and I sew one of those seams from top to bottom, I want to sew the other seams from top to bottom. You want to always keep it consistent. Consistency is the key when sewing, and this is just because like the interaction between the tension of your presser foot and your feed dogs could end up like skewing the fabric a little bit, yada yada yada. Basically, all you gotta know is sew everything in the same direction, keep it consistent, and it will look better. Anyways, I think that is all the tips I have for you today. Let me know if you have any other video requests, any questions, comments, leave them down below. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more fashion tips and sewing tutorials. Oh, definitely follow me on Instagram and TikTok. I do a lot of Q&As and I post other content on those platforms as well. Anyways, yeah, I think that's everything. So thank you so much for watching this video. I'll see you next time. Bye.